Got some cool walk-up music, huh? Isn't that awesome? Good morning, everyone. All right, cool, good. Good morning. Happy Father's Day to everyone. Today is a special day, in part because it's Father's Day, but also today's the last day of this sermon series we've been working on, right? True faith. So if maybe this is your first time, you're not exactly sure where we are, what we've been doing is taking Jesus, maybe most famous sermon, the Sermon on the Mount, and been taking from that maybe the most famous part of it, the Beatitudes, or these blessings that Jesus gives for all of his people. And once we look at the blessing briefly, we then look for another narrative in the gospel that kind of fills it out a little bit more and helps flesh it out for us. So that's what we've been doing, right? By way of reminder, what we've done is we've looked at the poor in spirit, or those who mourn, or blessings on the meek, and what Jesus has to say about those people. We've talked about those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, how they are blessed, how the merciful are blessed, and how the pure in heart are blessed. And we've taken these either one or two at a time, and then connected them to some of the actions that we see Jesus doing. How are these promises made real, and how do these promises manifest? So today, we have a two-parter. We have blessed are the peacemakers, for they'll be called children of God, and blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And we're going to look at both of these today because these do tend to go hand in hand. Because the peacemaker that Jesus is calling people to kind of interrupts the status quo of the world today, and that causes a little bit of friction. And that friction, when brought to its full extension, can lead to persecution, right? So we're going to look at both of these things. I think the first place to start, natural place to start, is what's a peacemaker? What comes to mind when you think of a peacemaker? What came to mind for me, I don't think will come to mind for everyone, but if you're familiar with the book series or the movie series, The Hunger Games, it's this dystopian fiction series where you have this central city called the capital, and the capital has all the wealth and opulence and influence and power. And outside the capital, there are these 12 districts. And so some of them are agricultural and mining and farming and munitions. And as these 12 districts do their work, their mining and munitions and farming, a lot of their output goes to the capital, and very little of it stays in those districts, right? So the capital gets really wealthy while the districts stay really poor. And so there's these huge tilted scales, looks relatively unfair or unjust. And the only way that the capital is able to maintain that status is through what they call the peacekeepers. And the peacekeepers are this sort of local, domestic military force that is meant to keep the peace. And so anytime someone might call out the injustice that they're seeing, the peacekeepers have the authority or have the right to either arrest or even execute these people. And so the capital has this mindset, well, the best way to keep peace, the best way to stop violence is with a little bit of violence. And if you follow the series, you find that actually ends up being an ineffective way for them to keep the peace. But they're thinking, through violence and through lack of conflict, we'll maintain peace. But I think for most of us, that doesn't quite fit. That doesn't sound like the full definition of peace. And so it made me ask, well, what is peace? What comes to mind when you think of being at peace or having peace? I had two places come to mind. The first place that came to mind for me is a place I rarely get to, almost never get to, because I don't have it. But I have friends that do sometimes, or I can even pay to go to one of these, but sitting on a dock on a placid lake early in the morning, it's 65 degrees, cool enough that I should have a long sleeve shirt on, but warm enough that I can still wear shorts. The water's super calm. I've got a warm cup of coffee. The sun's coming up. A fish splashes over there. A bird takes off over here. It's totally peaceful. That's the place where I find peace. That's a hard place to get to. I have a silver medal place, which is in my backyard. We have two trees, and I've hung a hammock between them. And I've found that that's another place where I get peace. But it's not peaceful just because it's lacking violence, although that helps, right? That's not complete. And so there's more to peace than just this lack of violence. There's more to peace than this lack of conflict. There's something that I realize, that whether it's like my presumed inadequacies or my stresses or my worries or my task list, when I'm sitting on that dock or when I'm swinging in the hammock, those things kind of just like melt away. And so when you read about peace in the Old Testament of the Bible before Jesus comes, in the New Testament of the Bible after Jesus comes, this is always what peace refers to, right? Not just the lack of conflict, but this holistic peace, right? This renewal and refreshment in your person, in your body, right? And so Jesus is calling peacemakers and calling them blessed, and he says, that's the children of God. Those are my people. And so who are peacemakers, right? I think it's fair to say peacemakers, not merely conflict avoiders. In some ways, I think the peacemakers are opposite of that. Because if you want to be a peacemaker, you do need to go where there's no peace. And where there's no peace, there's conflict. So the peacemakers are the people that have to go into the messy, sticky parts of the world where there's sickness and illness and brokenness, where there's oppression and injustice, and all these things that God tells us clearly are not part of his design. And they need to come into these places and bring peace. And so Jesus is saying, yep, those are my people. Those are the people doing the Lord's work, are the people that go into those places. Those are the children of God. But then he tells you that that's not going to be easy, right? Because blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness. And so as you become a peacekeeper and you come into these places that are broken and need peace, all those places have existed, right? They have structures, they have foundations, but those foundations are built off of something that's not peace. And so people have come accustomed to a lack of peace. They've gotten comfortable with the lack of peace. They become okay with some of the oppression, some of the injustice, some of the brokenness, the sickness, the illness, the death, that becomes normal. And so as you come in as a peacekeeper and you say, no, we have an antidote for all of those things have no place in God-good creation. You're going to rub up against the institutions that already exist, the institutions that benefit because they've adapted to a place that lacks peace. And Jesus says, but as you come with your righteousness, you're going to cause some friction. And that friction is going to grow to persecution. So in a lot of ways, peacemaking and persecution are opposite sides of the same coin. They tend to go hand in hand. And that's the passage that we're going to look at today. We're going to look in Matthew 10 as Jesus begins to send out his disciples to bring peace into a nation. He warns them that if you bring peace, persecution is coming. Right? So we'll start in Matthew 9. Frame everyone, get us all in the same space. But Jesus traveled through all the towns and villages of that area, right? Whichever area he was in, teaching in the synagogues and announcing the good news about the kingdom. And he healed every kind of disease and illness. He started to bring peace, right? He started to bring peace where there was illness and sickness and brokenness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they're confused and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. He noticed there's a lack of peace here, and he started to do something about it. And so he told his disciples, the harvest is great, but the workers are few. There's a lot of people who need peace. There's a large lack of peace in this space, and there's not enough people who are willing to bring peace. There's not enough peacemakers. So pray that the Lord, who is in charge of the harvest, ask him to send more workers, more peacemakers into his field. So that's how chapter 9 closes, and we pick up right away in chapter 10, and Jesus says, pray for more peacemakers. By the way, my 12 disciples, come to me. You have the authority to drive out impure spirits, to heal every disease and every sickness. You have the authority to bring peace into these places that don't have peace. And so these 12 Jesus sent with the following instructions. Don't go to the Gentiles or the Samaritans. Rather, go to the lost sheep of Israel. Now, the reason that he's doing this is, right, if you're a first century Jew, you've studied the Old Testament, you recognize that in the scriptures there are several cautions about worshiping the wrong God, worshiping the false gods, worshiping other gods. And Jesus knows, he's like, no self-respecting Jew. If this thing comes from the Gentiles first, if this comes from a pagan religion first, the Jews will never accept it. So we have to start with them because they're hyper aware of the wrong God. So it comes from them and then we'll go, right? This is the first commission, then there's a greater commission to come. But go to Israel first. And as you go, proclaim this message: the kingdom of heaven has come near. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the leper, drive out demons. I gave that to you for free, so you get to give it away for free too. These are all things that bring peace. Correcting sickness, opposing death, cleaning what's dirty, driving out those that are tormented, spiritually tormented. This is holistic peace. This is peace for everyone. So go be peacemakers. You've seen it. Now go do it. And so I was thinking, like, man, how would I feel about that? And I bet different people here would probably feel a different way. I know there's certain people who'd be like, yeah, they'd be so excited. Like, I'm so ready. And a couple other people would be a little bit more, I don't know about that. That doesn't seem right, seems a little scary. I'm not sure that I believe I can actually do that. And I was trying to think, have I ever felt like that tension? Like, yeah, I think I need to, but also I don't think I can. Or yeah, I think I need to, but I don't think I should. And I have, in a very different space, like a non-spiritual domain, very small scale. But in February of 2020, just barely, my wife and I, we went to South Africa. My wife's parents are South African. Most of her family is still living in South Africa. And we got married in 2018, so it's almost like this rite of passage that once I marry into the family, like, you got to get on the continent. You got to go meet the family. And so we did. We went on a game drive. Most Americans would call it a safari. They don't call it there, so that's a pro tip for you if you go to South Africa. You go on a game drive, and we saw all sorts of animals, right? Me and this giraffe got to watch the sunset. We saw these pair of zebras, not zebras, right? That's another tip for you. We saw these zebras here, and we were like less than 20 feet from this rhino. That was super cool. That's a massive animal. And I could hear it eating all this grass, and it sounded just like massive shears mowing the lawn. Like, it was so loud. It was so cool. It's such a powerful animal. And one morning, Megan's cousin, Megan, my wife, her cousin said, oh, I've got a treat for you guys. I've got a surprise. We're going to go paragliding. I was like, that's so cool. And so I took a video of the paragliders when we got to the top of the mountain, or to the top of one of the mountains. So this is in Cape Town, South Africa. And you can see they are hundreds and thousands of feet above the surface of the earth. They have beautiful mountain views, beautiful ocean views. It's incredible. It's incredible. And I'm looking at this thing like, oh my gosh, like, people are flying. People get to fly. People don't normally get to fly. And now we get to take part in this. And we get to be a part of this really cool thing that I can see happening. And so we get to the top, we're talking with the instructor, and he gives us all the gear. And so I'm like putting on the harness, and I never know which hole is the leg hole in the harness. And I put it on, and he's like, all right, is that comfortable? And I'm like, I really don't care if it's comfortable. I need to make sure it works. He's like, you're fine. And so it comes our turn to go, and it was like, once the harness on, he's like, all right, we're next. And so go to the launch pad. And the launch pad is on the side of this mountain, and it like kind of slopes down. It's all been cleared out, and that's where you launch from. And so it's this slope downward, and below the slope is a cliff face, and below that is certain death, right? And so we get to the launch pad, and I'm like, all right, how do we take off? He's like, oh, you need to run as fast and as hard as you can towards the cliff. I'm like, okay, that can't be true. And he's like, yeah, that's what you need to do. He's like, and if you don't do that, if you don't run as hard as you can, the chute isn't going to open. I was like, oh my gosh, okay. He's like, so you need to be fully committed. And it's this idea of like, you have all the equipment that you need now, and you just have to go do it. You just have to go run off the side of this mountain, and you'll take off, and you too can fly. And there's like this tension of like, okay, like, I see people flying, and it looks really cool, and like, this guy's done it 1,000 times, and so if I don't trust him, who do I trust, right? Like, if I don't trust him, then I'm never doing this. But if he tells me we can do it, we're gonna do it. And so then I start running, and before I know it, like my feet are off the ground, right? And we're high above the mountain, and we're high above the ocean, and it's so cool. And it's like, the views were amazing, the experience was amazing. I mean, like, I can't even describe in words what I felt, right? Because it's everything you see, but it's also the sea mist in your face, and there's the smell and the feel and all of it. And as I was looking through it, they set us up with a GoPro, a little portable camera. And so as I was looking at the videos of me up there, I started to develop a theory that, like, if you're suspended by a piece of fabric thousands of feet above the surface of the earth, comfortably seated in the lap of a South African man, you start to know, like, what type of person you are. And I realized I'm like a take-it-all-in type person, because this next picture is me at the peak of euphoria and awe and wonder. I showed this to my wife, and this has nothing to like do with the message anymore. We've taken aside, but she had no kind words to say about this image. And then I was like, well, let's see what Megan looks like. She probably looks kind of silly too. And then I pulled the picture, and I was like, oh, like that's what you're supposed to look like. And so on the one hand, if you compare them together, you've got, like, this is what belongs on the brochure, and this is what happens if a robot learns to fly. And I put these together, and I was like, we're separated by minutes, right? We're under the same African sun, and she just has this, like, radiant glow about her that was not captured in my picture. Anyway, so I'm thinking the disciples felt something like that. Like, okay, this guy's telling me I'm going to run over the face of the cliff to certain death, but I'll somehow be carried. Like, I've been given the equipment I need to go bring peace into this place that has no peace. Okay, I trust him. I'm going to go do it. And Jesus tells them that, and then he starts to give them, like, some of the fine print on the liability waiver, right? And he says, I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves. Like, this is the warning. So be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves, right? And said a different way, keep your head on a swivel. And when Jesus calls us to be shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves, that doesn't mean when the opportunity for shrewdness arises, be shrewd. And when the opportunity for innocence arises, be innocent. No, he's telling you, be both of these things all the time. Be completely both of these things all the time. Very similar to when God first introduces himself to Moses, and he tells them that I am so forgiving. I forgive thousands and thousands of generations. I forgive iniquity and sin, but I don't overlook the guilty. I am both fully merciful, but I'm also fully just. And he gives us as like image bearers of a heavenly Father who says, I can be these two things fully that look contradictory. He's saying the same thing here. Be both shrewd and innocent, even if they look in conflict with each other. Because, right, if you're shrewd but without innocence, that's how you tend toward corruption, right? And if you're innocent without shrewdness, you tend towards naivety, and you start to ignore the evils and the pains of this world. You start to forget that people actually need a peacemaker to be brought to them. And so Jesus is telling you, be both. Be both of these things all the time, and keep your head on a swivel. Why? Because you need to be on your guard. You'll be handed over to the local councils. You'll be beaten in their churches. You'll be hated by everyone because of me. But the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. When you are persecuted in one place, don't fight back, right? Flee to another. But no, right? No, don't suppose that I've come to bring peace to the earth. I didn't come to bring peace, but a sword. Like, but wait a minute. This started with bringing peacemakers. This started with healing, right? Raising the dead, healing the sick, cleansing the lepers, casting out demons, all the different ways that we can experience a lack of peace. And now Jesus is telling us, no, I didn't come to bring peace, but a sword. If you read this in isolation, this looks violent. This looks too violent, right? This doesn't necessarily fit the person of Jesus. One lens that you could read this through is imagine right? Because before Jesus, you have this whole history of the Old Testament prophets reminding God's people, reminding Israel that they're falling short and they need to reorient how they're living their lives, and they need to bring in the promises that God has for this world. And they keep refusing. So one way you could look at this is imagine you're in maybe a doctor's office or a hospital bed, and as the doctor enters the room, you're like, great, thank you, I need that medicine. And the doctor says, oh, no, your body is rejecting the medicine. I didn't come to bring medicine, I brought a scalpel today because there's something killing you, and I need to separate that from you. The medicine will come, that will come after, but first priority is this has to be removed. Right? That's one way to look at what Jesus means by sword, this division, but importantly, it's not the disciples that are bringing the sword. Right? There's one person bringing the sword, it's the one who has the authority and who has the knowledge and the insight and the ability to extract you from the evil. Right? And so Jesus continues, because I've come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be the members of his own household. It's important to pause and say Happy Father's Day to everyone here. I know, tough day, right? Tough choice. I didn't pick it. But so Jesus is now he's painting this picture of division rather than this picture of peace. And so you might be wondering, well, what's happening? What's going on? This doesn't make a lot of sense to me. We think that today. If you're a first century Jew, you're like, oh, I've seen that. I know that quote. I've seen that movie. That's from Micah. Right? And if you've not read the book of Micah, you should. It's an Old Testament prophet. The Old Testament prophets would speak on behalf of God to the people of Israel. And what Micah says is almost the exact same thing. For a son dishonors his father, a daughter rises up against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies are the members of his own household. The book of Micah, go read it this week. It's such a good book. But the book of Micah calls out Israel for its comfort with corruption and injustice and oppression. It's shining a light on everything that the Israelites are doing, and it's telling them this is not how God intended this world to be. And in the book of Micah, it opens with like God coming down from heaven out of anger and frustration that the Israelites are so comfortable with corruption and injustice and oppression. And so by directly quoting Micah, Jesus is doing the same thing. He's saying, oh, Israel, it's no different. You're still not listening. You're still too comfortable with the brokenness that exists in the world. And so if we look just a little closely at Micah, here's the types of things we see the nation of Israel doing. Yet to this very hour, says the God of the Bible, my people rise against me like an enemy. You steal the shirts right off the backs of those who trusted you, making them as ragged as men returning from battle. You've evicted women from their pleasant homes and forever stripped their children of all that God would give them. So man, Israel is this place of like tension and violence and theft. It's this place of now like the law of the jungle is sort of taking over, right? And the strong are devouring the weak and taking what they want. But it's not just the inhabitants of Israel, right? The Lord has something very specific for the leaders of Israel. This is what the Lord says. You false prophets are leading my people astray. Right? The Lord has a certain word for his people, and the prophets are meant to guide them, and they're failing. You promise peace for those who give you food, and you declare war on those who refuse to feed you. Right? The prophets are prophets for profit. They're not speaking the truth that God has offered his people, but instead are doing a little bit of pay to play. And if you give me more money, you get a better blessing on your home. And so the Lord continues, you're building Jerusalem on a foundation of murder, on a foundation of corruption. You rulers make decisions based on bribes. Your priests teach God's laws only for a price. You prophets won't prophesy unless it's for profit. And so all of this is bad, right? Like all of this is not what the Lord wants for his people, for his kingdom. This is not the promise that he's brought, but he also knows this is what the broken world looks like. So it's not necessarily the brokenness here that the Lord has a problem with, although he does. But the largest indictment is this last one. Yet all of you claim to depend on the Lord. It's not just that you live in this broken world and you're a broken part of this world, but you're telling everyone that we are children of the one God of the universe, and yet we live in a broken way like everyone else does, leaning into the corruption and the injustice. We're promising that we have the antidote, but it's just the same poison everyone else has. And this is the type of environment that Jesus is coming into. And Jesus says, okay, so those are the wolves that I'm sending you to, right? This is why you need to be shrewd. Next slide, please. You are going in as a sheep among these wolves. You need to be shrewd like snakes and like doves, not because it's going to be obvious that everyone is in misalignment with the Lord. No, but people are going to tell you one thing and their actions are going to bear true another. And so you need to be wise. You need to keep your head on a swivel. And if you read the book of Micah, what happens is the Lord comes down and he ends up ultimately inverting the entire system. And so what Jesus is saying is we're coming in now, by quoting Micah, we're coming in to invert the entire system. But it's a system where people have been successful and people have made a lot of money, and the institutions are now built around a lot of the oppression and obstruction and corruption. And so Jesus says, as we come and do this, and as we bring peace, remember, all he's telling the disciples to come with is peace. Come to heal, come to raise the dead. Go conquer sickness, go conquer death, go bring cleanliness, go win those spiritual wars. That's all he's telling them to bring. Everything is good. Capital G, objectively good. And even then he's saying people aren't going to love that because what they've built is built off of something less than that. And so we need to come and we need to turn it upside down because they've gotten it wrong. And he says, in those moments, you'll create some friction and you'll have to make a choice. Right? So anyone who loves their father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who loves their son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. This is not saying don't love your family. It certainly doesn't say that. But what it does say, right, is sometimes mom or dad might ask you to do a particular thing. Your son or daughter might ask you to live in a particular way. And that's going to come in conflict with what the teachings of Jesus are. And Jesus is saying simply, you'll have to make that choice. And here are the stakes, depending on the choice that you make. But it's up to you, ultimately. So he's sending his disciples into this place. He's sending them to be peacemakers, and he's promising, kind of guaranteeing, persecution. And this is where I had to recalibrate a little bit, asking the question, so who's the persecutor here? And this is where, when I think of persecution, right, the first words I think of are Christian persecution, opposite parts of the world, maybe in the Far East, maybe in the Middle East, where you see arrests and torture and beheadings, and it's Christians going into a foreign place with a different culture who believe a different thing. And that happens. That happens the world over. There's no place for that in the kingdom of God. But that's not the type of persecution Jesus is promising. In fact, Jesus is saying, don't go to those places yet, right? Don't go to the Gentiles or to the Samaritans. Go first to the church. Go first to the lost sheep of Israel because they're living in a way that's not in alignment. And so we need to address what's wrong in the house first before we try and go outward, right? This is the first commission before an even greater commission that says go find everyone. But he's forcing and asking all of Israel to look in a mirror, right? To find your blind spot. Where have you become maybe a little bit too comfortable with corruption and brokenness and injustice and all these sorts of things? And to start to address it, right? And so it's Sunday, right? Tomorrow's Monday, and you might be thinking, okay, fine. What am I going to do Monday morning? What do I do with this information, right? I would say just start as simple as name a fraction, right? Yeah, this is coming. So name a fraction, right? And so go find the thing, that blind spot that you have. Bring it to the Lord, pray over it, right? You may not fully see it, you may not fully understand what it is, but maybe you've profited off of something that you know is not right, or maybe you've been fine with the oppression of a certain person or people or whatever. Name that, bring it to the Lord, and then you'll have to go to the launch pad and you'll have to run full steam over the edge. You just have to trust that what Jesus is telling you is good, to go be that peacemaker, to fix the sickness and the illness and the death and the brokenness, that you have all the tools you need. You have to trust, right? And if you trust, then you can fly, and you'll have a great teacher who will guide you gently to the ground. Or like maybe you'll get in the way a little bit, and maybe you won't lift your feet as high as you should have, and maybe you won't do it exactly right. But immediately after Micah mentions the son against his father and the daughter against his mother, he says, "But for me, I look to the Lord for help. I wait confidently for God to save me, and my God will certainly hear me. Do not gloat over me, my enemies, for though I fall, which I did, I'll rise again." And thankfully, the GoPro was oriented in such a way that like the sun was immediately over my head, giving me this cool halo effect. That was awesome. But this is the really exciting part of the promise, right? Because the promise is, yes, we need peace, and peace has to come into these places that has no peace. But it's not simply that you'll try and bring peace and it'll lead in persecution and that's the end of the story. No. What Micah says, once again, you'll have compassion on us. You'll trample our sins under your feet and throw them into the depths of the ocean. And so as you read the Bible, there's a lot of violence in the Old Testament, and sometimes it's hard to rationalize, but what I think the Old Testament is showing us is the intuition that we need to challenge, the intuition that the Capitol and the Hunger Games thought was true, is the idea that lasting peace can be brought with a sword. And the Old Testament tells us no. If you start with the sword, you may have a moment of peace, but ultimately, lasting peace never comes with the sword. Jesus, who likes to flip everything that we understand upside down, says, no, you get to come with peace first. Come with peace. There may be a sword in the short term, but the only way to have lasting peace is to start with peace. Right? And so the promise from Micah, injustice, corruption, oppression, all of those things get thrown into the sea. All of those things get to go. But the really cool news is that we get to stay. Right? Cling to those things if you want to, but you know that they don't belong here. You can feel it, they don't belong here. So let go of them. Those get thrown away, those get trampled, and we get to stay. So we'll get the TV out of here, but I think the one thing we need to ask is, what is that fracture? Where is the brokenness that we see? Go get out on the launch pad, run off the cliff, because you can fly and you've got the permission to do it imperfectly. Your feet are probably going to get in the way. You might crash land. But I promise you this, I'm not going to crash like that again. I might crash a different way. But I'll lift my feet up high enough next time. So worship team's going to lead us, and then we'll get you out of here. Thanks, guys.